Welcome to Off the Record, talking real estate with Joe and Makayla. If you're interested in the Portland, Oregon real estate market and want the unvarnished inside scoop, you've come to the right place. Thanks for giving us a listen.
Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. So we're hopping on this after the fact. We recorded this episode on November 14th, but we wanted to jump back on to share a very unfortunate change that took place since this was recorded. Unfortunately, our wonderful guest, Hyle Bradley, that we interviewed for this episode, very unexpectedly passed away on the evening of November 29th. With very heavy hearts, we shared this news, and in this difficult time, we come together as a community to extend our deepest condolences to Hyle's wife, family, and friends. Hyle touched the lives of many with his kindness, warmth, and a spirit that will be remembered fondly. As you'll hear in this episode, Joe and I truly enjoyed working with Hyle. Above being very brilliant in his field, he was a really genuine person who we loved interacting with. And I think you'll definitely feel that through this episode.
Yeah, this was a difficult, choice for us, but Hyle's wife reached out to us and to share the news about what happened. And after processing what happened, she asked that we continue to release the episode that we recorded with him. And I think she's looking forward to having that experience live on for him and being able to see him and hear him. We hope this episode can be a nice tribute to Hyle and his amazing work in this field. So knowledgeable, such a nice guy. At the end of this episode, we reference where you can find Hyle. Obviously, please just disregard that piece and come to Makayla or myself if you have property management related questions. But we just want to reach out and give our condolences to Hyle's family, his friends. Just a wonderful guy that will certainly be missed.
Yeah. We've had tons of Hyle's friends reach out to us via social media, been swapping stories with them. And I think they're excited to hear this and have this. So yeah, it's with heavy hearts that we release this, but
but it's what his wife wanted. And so we're going to share it with the world, and hopefully it makes his family and friends smile and in remembrance. And, if you need property management information, this is going to be a great episode. If you need more afterwards, please reach out to us, and we'll get you in touch with Hyle's company. We'll go from there. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Great. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. You want to introduce our guest today?
I do. So I'm so excited to have this guest on. We've developed a really great relationship over the past few years, and he is our trusted property manager. As realtors, we get tons and tons of questions about renting or someone who owns a property and wants to rent that out. And that's not our area of expertise. So we are excited to chat with our good friend Hyle Bradley today from Real Property Management Solutions. Hyle, welcome.
Good afternoon to both of you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. How are you today?
Life is so good, Joe. Life is so good. Makayla, nice to see you as well. Very excited.
Good. We're so excited to have you because property management, renting, investing, all those things we get asked all the time. And when it comes to things like this, we want to defer to the pros. And you are one of the most knowledgeable people we've gotten to know over the years. So we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really look forward to being here. And I'm so happy to work with a couple of realtors like yourselves that really set the bar high for our city. So
awesome.
Thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've gotten face to face. I sometimes feel bad, I have to admit, because I just sometimes shoot you questions in such a frenzy, or like a text or an email, and I'm just like, I don't know, I need to contact Hyle right away. But you're always Johnny on the spot, and you're always happy to share your knowledge with us. So that's much appreciated. So we're happy to keep that rolling with our audience.
Well, happy to be a resource, and I'm psyched to get into it today.
Nice. Very nice.
All
Well, we've
right.
got some questions. I think Makayla's going to lead it off, but these are a lot of the questions that we get from clients all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this episode's going to be geared towards what you should know as a renter. So just starting off pretty easy. People always ask us, especially when they're moving into Portland, how long they should give themselves to get into a rental property. So what would be your time frame recommendation there?
I think it's fairest to estimate 3 weeks to get into the property based on the average time it takes a tenant to search a couple homes, do some walkthroughs, and certainly explore areas of the city that they want to live in. In terms, if they've settled on a place, if they only want to live downtown in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I found it, and they start the application process, it shouldn't take long once they've selected the home. But a big part of this is, a big part of the tenant process is the selection of a home, taking a look at different amenities, et cetera. But I think that 3 weeks should be the most.
Yeah. Do you ever have people come into town and are just like, we don't know where we want to live. We don't know much about the city. Can you help us out with what you recommend? That type of thing?
Absolutely, Joe. And that's a great question because in a lot of other markets, brokers actually place tenants in properties.
Yeah,
meaning they'll take them around, tour them. We're a little bit different. And because of some of the local legislation and the fair ordinance, certainly discouraging us as realtors and property managers from potentially steering a tenant towards one property or another, that doesn't really exist here. And as a result, the emergence of tech-based online resources has really evolved. And we think that Zillow, HotPads, and Trulia are largely the big three in terms of being able to search for a property in the city or in the city of Portland, in the state of Oregon, and be able to easily and readily compare them all. Certainly there are other sites, and I've used even Apartment List and a couple others, but what's great about those is they so quickly allow you to compare area by area in a way that property manager or a well-behaved self-managing landlord might not be able to describe with an accuracy, given some environmental factors, without potentially placing themselves in a liability position, maybe saying something that they shouldn't, or potentially steering their tenant or giving that tenant the impression that they're steering them towards a certain area of the city or a certain unit.
And it's hard to know in ads too, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to really describe what you've got in a little tiny ad a lot of times.
It's true. And so because showings are such a critical part of tenant placement in Portland and in the Portland metro market, I think that adds to that overall time and adds to the search process if you're a tenant prospect.
Cool.
Okay. Just a little tangent that I came up with while you were talking there. How's inventory in general right now in this market? Are people pretty lucky with finding a home where they want to live, or what does that look like right now?
We've now seen in our local rental market and on the national level, Makayla, vacancy increases for 22 straight months. So that's a month over month, an increase in the vacancy rate. And that's certainly across all unit types, anywhere and everywhere. But locally, what we're seeing is a concentration of options for tenants looking for a smaller property. The vacancy rate around 1-bedroom and studio units hasn't been this high in a few years, more than I can remember, honestly. Multifamily Northwest, which is a great resource for realtors and property managers alike, just put out their fall report, and it indicated average vacancy rate for those smaller unit types, studio being around 7%. So there's a lot more options for renters than there have been previously in our market. And renters really have a lot of options, not just in the more urban parts of the city, but in the metro, in the suburban metro as well. Because I think that's the part of the market we saw maybe the biggest rise in vacancy is out of the city, as folks really wanted to live there when they could work remotely, and there was a big household expansion at the end of the pandemic. Now that the pandemic is over, folks still can work from home, but the market in terms of the demand for those, whatever unit type folks were looking for has cooled. As a result, rents have slid, and year over year, we're down quite a bit in our local Portland Metro as well. So there's more options for renters. It's a good time to look for a spot if you're a renter, keeping in mind that since 2020, in most markets, rents have been up between 15 and 25%. So even though we've been down over the last 12 months, the overall floating of the market through the inflation that we saw has had a permanent effect.
So that's another question that we get a lot is, how much do rents increase on a year-to-year basis or over a couple of years? And it sounds like that's been significant over the past 2 or 3, right?
It has, Joe. And one of the factors that really affected it was that household expansion. In the United States, we saw 127 million households, a low number in the middle of 2020 when the pandemic had reached its height and folks were very, very concerned about physical and emotional health, taking care of loved ones, et cetera. And as the fears around the pandemic and the restrictions both lifted, we saw this expansion all at once that could never be matched with the inventory that we had, either locally or on a national level.
Yeah, it was intense, wasn't
it? Yeah, it really was. And in a market where we had seen maybe a 5 or 6% annual increase in 1 year in 2021, Beaverton, Oregon saw a 17% increase in rent across all unit types. I mean, that's a monumental, unheard of, unprecedented, hyperbolic change. And as a result, it continued into 2022 for a while until the interest rate environment and overall inflation started to rear its ugly head and cool those rental increases. And then as we've moved into 2023, we've seen the effects of that cooling in 2022 carry throughout the year. Yeah. So during the pandemic, we were building a lot of property. Not all of it was available to renters because of supply chain issues, lumber prices, et cetera. But when the certificates of occupancy all became available, largely at the same time, while we were still building and issuing permits, it issued in this new era, this new environment where renters have more options, and to fill, these vacant units that have just become available and to meet these investor standards, concessions, lowering of rent, adjustments to pricing to fill the units occurred, and it affected the entire market. So
supply and demand at work.
Supply and demand, yeah. And we see a lot of seasonal supply and demand. So for instance, right now we're seeing typically, the summer stays really hot. And as you move out of August, September's that first month where you see a small amount of rent decline in terms of the price decline. We saw that this year in August, and September and October's declines were both higher than we had seen in a couple of years, which indicates to us that it's not just folks, afraid to move or find a new home to live in. It's a lack of turnover and overall churn that contributes to the natural rental market update.
Right.
Got it. So if I'm a renter, winter might be a good time to be looking for a new place. Is that?
If you're a renter, moving in the winter in this market it's a great time. You might have a few fewer options, but the power of your dollar is increased quite a bit.
Got it.
That's good to know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a lot like, the residential market. We've always had strong winter sales. And I think it's kind of a secret. A lot of people out there think that it's not a great time to buy because of the holidays and all that. But man, if you can find the right house, a lot of times the conditions and the pricing are better than you're going to find the rest of the time of the year. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, moving into the application process as a renter, what should people be prepared to share with their potential landlords when they're applying?
Yeah, so certainly if you're a renter, you got to be ready to present a couple items. One, you got to verify who you are. So make sure that you have, it seems like a basic one, but you'd be surprised the amount of times that we don't get, or we struggle as a property management company to get someone to give a driver's license or a photo ID, verification that they are who they are. They're certainly going to be asked to submit some credit history. Now, credit score may not always be a determining factor. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But having debt in collections is almost always going to be something that could prevent a renter from being offered a property. So I would prepare if I was a potential renter that maybe had some adverse credit activity, I would take the time to rectify that maybe before I applied. I would certainly plan on having $50 to apply to any property that I was potentially interested in renting. And then I'd be prepared to have some rental history, references, and verification of income. So,
So
often
that's
a
right?
pay slip, or, could indicate bank statement if the income comes from a trust fund, whatever it is. Those are three of the big ones. And of course, most of the rental, if you're going to go through a property management company, a criminal background is very likely to be checked. Most self-managing landlords are going to check this as well, but I have noticed of late, anecdotally, a few landlords that have I look at the application, I screen it for credit, and just hope for the best.
Yeah.
I tend to recommend against that. The city and state both have clear definitions about what you're allowed to and not allowed to advertise for. And I encourage anyone to go to either portlandhousingphb.gov or simply look up Oregon's Chapter 90 statutes, and they'll dig deeper into that. But you, as a renter, prove who you are, prove that you can pay for the property, prove that you don't have adverse criminal history, prove that you have rental history. Those are the big ones.
Seems very straightforward and all fair things I need to provide. So.
Yeah. I think people, if the shoe were on the other foot and you own the property and you were renting it to someone, you would probably want those things to be checked out.
Yeah, I would think so.
Right.
Well,
Interesting.
cool. Okay. Are there any protections I have as a renter in this local marketplace?
You absolutely do. Chapter 90 in Oregon's statutes addresses directly the role of the landlord. It talks a lot about the laws governing the landlord and tenant relationship. And locally in the city of Portland, there's an entire website that I just might have mentioned called the Portland Housing Bureau, and phb.gov is a great resource for any renter who is who has questions about their current situation. Is this right? Is this not right? And it's a really valuable resource. Overall, this is one of the more tenant-friendly states in terms of tenant protections. And I think in a really good way. To start, there's a rent cap here. We're the only state in the United States. The state government has come across and said, here's the most you can raise the rent in a year. And we're going to tell you what that is every year. Our legislators just passed a law in the spring, in fact, to address the massive inflation that allowed this. The state had previously said 7% plus the consumer price index will be the rental cap. Well, when it came out in 2022 that the rental cap in 2023 was 14.6%, it raised a lot of eyebrows and certainly made a lot of tenants feel, a high level of anxiety. Is my rent going to go up 14.6%? Because I haven't seen a 14% raise in my,
right.
my job or my grant from school, whatever it might be. So Makayla, to get back to it, the renters are protected because the landlords can only raise the rent once a year, and it can't be more than that 10%. The state passed a law, it went into effect July 1st, signed by Governor Kotek. It's whatever's less than 7% plus CPI, consumer price index, or 10%. So right there, we're in a state where that's tenant friendly in a way that no other state is.
And you're saying that no other state in the United States has that type of cap? Is that correct?
At this point, that's correct. That's right. Wow. Chapter 90 and the Bill 608, which passed in 2019, was the first of its type. Now, I am aware that there are several other states that are looking at a form of this, but what makes ours different is not just the rental cap itself. We also talk about that Chapter 90 and the way that it was changed also talks about how you can end a tenancy. So if you're a renter and you've lived in the home for longer than a year, 365 days, a landlord can't come to you and simply end your tenancy for no cause without what's called a landlord qualifying reason. And this is way different than, again, a lot of other states. Tenancy as it's defined is slightly different here because of the way that the state says you can end a tenancy. And I'll give a little example here. If I was living back in Boston, where I lived for many years, and I was under a fixed term agreement, Joe, and you were my landlord. At the end of that fixed term agreement, if I had not asked you for another agreement and you had not offered me one to sign, the expectation is at the end of that fixed term agreement, I'm simply moving out because I wouldn't be a tenant in good standing any longer, covered by the lease.
Sure, no contract.
In the state of Oregon, because the state says you can and cannot end a tenancy, if at the end of my 1 year occupancy as Joe's tenant, he says, I'm not going to offer you another fixed term agreement, but I continue to pay the rent, I become a month to month tenant. My tenancy doesn't end, and I continue to live in that property. Now, Joe has options. He can choose to raise my rent after that first fixed term agreement, as is his right under Chapter 90. However, he can't decide that he wants to sell the property and for no cause give me a 30-day notice. And that's another big protection tenants get here. It's ending of tenancy for the most part, unless it's you live with your landlord, if your landlord's upstairs from you or it's an owner occupied property, the laws change a little bit. But for the most part, it's a 90-day notice to end your tenancy.
Wow. And there are rules in place as far as compensation. Is that correct?
Joe, I'm so glad you brought that up. If you're in the state of Oregon, if you own 4 properties of any type, you have 4 ownership stake in 4 properties can be a piece of land, vacation home, your own home, your second home, for instance. You're required to pay the tenant 1 month's rent when you end their tenancy for no cause. Now, this doesn't cover, won't help a tenant who is being asked to vacate a home because he hasn't paid rent or he or she, they or them have not.
So if they're in good standing, that's
in
what
good
they're...
standing, exactly.
Right.
As long as the tenant's in good standing, ending the tenancy without cause will cost you 1 month's rent if you fall under those parameters. Inside the city of Portland, anytime you are ending the tenancy for no cause and you don't have an exemption for this relocation payment, regardless of the number of properties you own, regardless of what you plan to do with that property, you, upon delivery of that 90-day notice, within 45 days, will be required to deliver a check for a relocation payment based on the number of bedrooms. And this, again, is all available on Portland Housing Bureau's website. But for instance, I believe that a 3-bedroom is a $4,500 check. So if you are a renter and you're in good standing and you potentially have your tenancy ended because the landlord's going to move back into the property, that's a landlord qualifying reason, for instance, you're not going to walk away without anything. And while you have 90 days, you're also going to get a small check to help cushion the blow of the next move.
Got it. And what about if it's inside that 12-month period? Does that still apply?
So great question. Inside of 12 months, you do tend to get more freedom under Chapter 90 to end the tenancy. You don't have to have one of the landlord qualifying reasons if you choose to end the tenancy within 12 months. But you still fall under all the relocation statutes. So inside the city of Portland, outside the city of Portland, just pay attention to that because the compensation would still be available to the tenant.
I think we should put a link to PHB on our Live Portland blog site. I think people would really appreciate seeing that. It's such a great resource and has so much great information on all the things that we're talking about. But it goes into real detail that I think people really need to understand and know about, don't you think?
I agree. I think it's a great resource.
Well, yeah, just wrapping up, I was anxious to hear if you had any general advice for someone going out to rent.
Dig in, do a lot of research. And certainly I encourage, I'm slightly biased given the nature of the industry that I work in and the company I work for. But I find that properties that are professionally managed, whether that's a self-managing landlord who does a professional job or professional property management services, go a long way to overall living satisfaction. I've been a renter here in the city of Portland, and I've had mixed experiences depending on who my property manager and landlord are and were. And as a result, if I was a renter again, I would be a bit pickier about that. Certainly don't be afraid to be ready to jump on a property. You know, the market, if you find something that you feel like is really going to suit your needs, it's not like the home purchasing industry locally. It's a much faster decision time that tenants tend to have. So you really want to be prepared to act quickly.
Sure. 7% kind of surprised me a little bit, Hyle. That seems really high vacancy.
That is just for studios, Joe.
Right.
And I agree. That's real high.
Yeah.
It is. That's real high.
That's a great opportunity for a lot of people that probably have been thinking, there's nothing to rent.
Exactly. And it's a great opportunity also for folks. Tells you a lot about what tenant preferences are in our market locally, that folks really want to work from home, or at least have a space to work from home, or have a space at home to either separate the professional and personal lives, because we're seeing a lot more push towards that 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 2-bath versus 2-bedroom, 1-bath, especially if someone's working from home. They need having that access to a dedicated bathroom. We're seeing demand around that increase, while demand for 1-bedroom and studios just continues to slow down. And it slowed down throughout the year. Now, we did see, Joe, a little bit higher vacancy rate in the spring, but I think that part of that is influenced by coming out of that winter, that slower period. The data sets you're going to get will be a little bit different. But
what's the hottest spot right now? Where do people want to rent? Where are you seeing the most activity?
I can't place tenants fast enough right now in the Wilsonville area.
Really?
I'm having a lot of good luck, Cedar Mill, that sort of the edge of Northwest Portland to Beaverton. As it gets a little quiet up there, we've seen a real short time to tenancy. But if you're curious about that, I encourage folks also to join multifamilynorthwest.org, as if you're a member, you have access to a really valuable report. It comes out twice a year, but it's deep data set. So
nice. Very nice.
Great. Well, we will definitely have all of your information on our website. But other than that, where's a good place for people to reach you directly if they just have any questions or?
Oh, I appreciate that so much. You can certainly reach us. You can contact us right through our website at www.realpmsolutions.com, or you can just email me. It's real easy. Hyle, Hyle, at realpmsolutions.com.
That's awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much
Hyle,
for your time, Hyle.
This is so much great information.
Like
I know, right? This is great stuff. Thank
you.
You're too
kind. You're too kind.
You're awesome. You're awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Visit liveportland.com or go to Hyle's site as well and grab information if you need it. And you can always reach out to Hyle or us, and we'll get you in connection with him. And I know he'll be happy to help out. Hyle, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Makayla, Joe, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Bye, Hyle.
Bye, Hyle.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us today. If you're interested in finding out more about Joe, myself, or the Live Portland team, you can go to liveportland.com. Thanks for giving us a listen, and see you next time on the Off the Record podcast.